Hello everyone, welcome to lecture 1 of Oppression, Diversity, and Social Justice. Joining me today, I have our TA, Max. Max, say hello. I know it looks kind of funny, but it is a proper cat. It's just small for its age. Max has left us. Max is not interested in learning about oppression, diversity, and social justice, but I'm hoping you are. So before we get into that though, let's first learn about what is social work. So there's many different views of social work, and these have obviously changed across time. Some of these images might be familiar to you. What society thinks of social work has often been quite negative, especially if you look at media representations, where social workers are either those bleeding heart do-goods, or they're the ones taking children away from their parents for absolutely no reason. There's also the view of social workers as being the enforcer of paternalistic state policies that can often be quite discriminatory. And that has resulted in things like the 60s scoop. So the removal of large amounts of Aboriginal and Native American children from their homes and their placement into often white foster homes and families. So our practice environment, the policies and practices that we are provided for by the state, and the expectations of us as a profession can often pull us in different directions. We try to be anti-oppressive, and we struggle to dismantle some of these structural inequalities, but we're doing so within a framework that is often very much opposed to these struggles. Apart from child welfare, a quick example that comes to mind is school social work, for instance. We've got anti-bullying legislation, which is becoming more prevalent. Unfortunately, this legislation tends to be zero tolerance policies. Zero tolerance policies, while having a good ideal, to stop bullying, prevent issues with child mental health, actually serve to further disadvantage certain child populations. And predominantly Black children are impacted by these zero tolerance policies. They are kicked out of school and end up actually feeding into the school to prison pipeline. So us as school social workers are actually contributing through this policy to a wider social issue that is resulting in the overrepresentation of especially Black males to be imprisoned within our criminal justice system. And it starts from the beginning when they enter school. So because of all of these different aspects of social work practice, it's a very personally and professionally taxing profession. It requires a lot of social support, and self-care is crucial to ensure that you don't burn out. However, the thing that you must always remember is that we hold a lot of biases and assumptions, and through critical self-reflection and critical consciousness, we need to work to address this, no matter where or what type of social work we do. Which brings us to the issue of social justice. And what is social justice? So the reality is that within our society, certain individuals have a lot more than they need. The entire social system within the United States is built such that certain groups have a lot more of the resources and power than other groups. And that's the reason why social work cannot be apolitical. We can never depoliticize the profession. We're always going to be advocates, and we're always going to bring on this political element into it. That doesn't mean that we support any one political party over another. We are equally critical of all political parties. Our current leadership has issues, maybe not to the same extent as the prior administration, but there are ongoing issues with children being detained at the border and separated from their parents and incarcerated in detention centers that were never stopped with the change in administration. So the political party that's in power is not as relevant to us as what they're actually doing and how their policies and practices are impacting the most disadvantaged populations. So the whole concept of social justice is aimed at removing the causes of these injustices. So you can see that here in the right-handmost side of the picture, where the fence that's preventing our spectators from watching the game is gone. Social justice, therefore, goes further than either equity or equality. So with equality, we're just looking to provide everybody with the same benefits, regardless of what their actual needs are. With equity, we try to base the benefits based on needs, but we don't actually address the cause of those needs. That's where social justice comes in, with the sort of redistribution of resources isn't even necessary because the causes of the uh, lack of equality and distribution is gone. It's an ideal that we strive for, but it's something that we are actually very far from achieving, unfortunately. Here is another way of imagining the relationship between inequality, equality, equity, and justice. So what we can see here is an amendment of the giving tree. And you can see that the giving tree is giving an apple to only one of the children because the entire tree is leaning only to one side. The other child doesn't get any apples. And we can take this a step further and consider this as just food in general. One portion of the population has access to food, the other one does not. Looking at a world with equality, both children would be granted ladders so that they can access the food. However, because of the nature of the tree and the fact that it's leaning to one side, just because you've given both children a ladder doesn't mean they can both access the food. Equity would mean addressing the fact that the tree is leaning to one side by giving one child a longer ladder. That way, they both have access to the tree. However, you'll notice that the child on the right has to climb a lot further up the ladder in order to access the food than the child that is on the left. Their ladder is shorter. They don't need to go as far to access the same amount of food. Social justice takes everything a step further and rightens the tree. Now everybody has access to the same amount of food at the same time with the same size ladder. There's no longer any inequalities in how people are able to access the resource or how long it takes them. Within this class, we're going to use the Just Practice framework that the course textbook presents. And that's an approach towards addressing inequality by placing social justice at the very front of social work. So what the author actually does is start calling it social justice work. And by doing that, we're moving social justice to being the center of our work, not just an afterthought that's added on as an addendum, as you might have noticed in some of the definitions that you read of social work practice. It's centered on challenging accepted ways of thinking, so the things that we take for granted, what we accept as norms, in order to address difference, oppression, and privilege. So for instance, let's consider homelessness. Is it an individual problem that could be addressed if people would just take any job that becomes available to them? Because then they'd be able to pay rent and afford an apartment. Or is homelessness the denial of a basic human right to shelter brought on by a profit-based rental and housing market that gives corporations more rights than persons? As you work on your own definition of what social work means to you and what social work practice you want to be engaged in, you need to consider how important is social justice going to be to you, and how are you going to approach social work practice.